California Senator Kamala Harris has just announced her bid for 2020. Watch.
Truth, justice, decency, equality, freedom, democracy. These aren't just words. They're the values we as Americans cherish, and they're all on the line now. The future of our country depends on you and millions of others lifting our voices to fight for our American values. That's why I'm running for President of the United States. I'm running to lift those voices, to bring our voices together. So please join me in Oakland on Sunday, January 27th, and go to kamalaharris.org to join our campaign. Let's do this together. Let's claim our future for ourselves, for our children, and for our country. I'll see you in Oakland.
All right, so my first impression is that politicians need to stop doing this. This comes off very phony, and I'm not sure why they keep doing it. Now, I'm going to break down the bad and the good of Kamala Harris because, look, clearly I'm going to be a critic here of Kamala Harris, but there's also good to Kamala Harris, and you can't ignore the good. But I think the most important thing here, before I even get into all the details, and there are a lot of details I want to get to, is don't be blinded by symbolism. So yes, having a female person of color would be great for president. The symbolism of that would be fantastic. But you can't just ignore somebody's record because they're black and a woman. I mean, the idea of focusing so much on the identity of the person over who they actually are, what their record shows, and what policies they fight for, I don't get it. And I think most people now at this point have moved away from being obsessed with symbolism and are actually more concerned about the details. So first up, here are some of those details. So it wasn't really clear in that video what Kamala Harris's policy focus will be, but Jeff Stein of the Washington Post put this tweet out. Key Kamala Harris 2020 policy agenda per campaign aides: $2.8 trillion middle-class tax cut, the LIFT Act, $76 billion in tax credits for low-income renters, bill to encourage states to reduce cash bail, election security, reduce racial disparity in childbirth deaths, and Medicare for all. Now, this is neoliberalism in a nutshell. So you have, of course, tax cuts. You have middle-of-the-road liberal proposals like a bill to encourage states to reduce cash bail. I mean, any bill that is to encourage something means that it's not going to actually get done. You have no-brainer policies like policies on election security and systemic racism, and one progressive policy to kind of, feed that progressive base that they think is still a small portion of people when in reality it isn't. But supporting Medicare for all, which is good. But based on her track record, could people actually trust that she would be willing to fight for real progressive policies like Medicare for all? I don't know. Now, this really shows you, this is the problem that I have with a lot of politicians like Kamala Harris, is they try to be everything to everyone. So they'll have, the tax cuts, they'll have the middle of the road liberal policies, and they'll have like one or two progressive policies. But if you are trying to be everything to everyone, then you're going to be nothing to anyone. So you have to actually be a fighter for something and have a track record of fighting for that. Because as we've seen time and time again, when politicians try to play this game of being everything to everyone, what ends up happening is they fall victim to the actual system, like Obama did. Now, let me just, I want to play a clip here because I think the average voter can be fooled into thinking that Kamala Harris is something that she isn't. And a perfect example is her response to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on The View.
Do you agree that she could possibly, in this ideology of the socialist left, could splinter your party?
No. I think that she is challenging the status quo. I think that's fantastic. I think
that, you know, I used to teach before, especially before in the last few years. And the thing that I always loved about teaching was when you teach, it requires you to defend the premise. Mm-hmm. And it requires you to re-examine the premise and question, is it still relevant? Does it have impact? Does it have meaning? And I think that she is introducing bold ideas that should be discussed. And I think it's good for the party. I frankly think it's good for the country. Let's look at the bold ideas. And I'm eager that we have those discussions. And when we are able to defend the status quo, then do it. And if if there's not merit to that, then let's explore new ideas.
Now, Kamala Harris comes off, I think, incredibly likable here. So if you are into or if you support Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her policies, seeing Kamala Harris defend Ocasio-Cortez here and Ocasio-Cortez going after the status quo, then you think, oh, wow, that's great. Kamala Harris is in support of challenging the status quo. But she isn't. So this is one of those double-sided, two-faced answers that, again, tries to appeal to everyone. So she is defending Ocasio-Cortez in her challenge to the status quo without taking up that challenge herself. And the perfect example showing you that is how these two politicians fundraise. So while Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez fundraises on small individual donations and a grassroots movement, Kamala Harris doesn't. So all we have to do is take a look at her source of funds during her campaigns, and we see that large donors and PACs are over a combined 63% of her support, with large individual contributions being almost 60% just by themselves. Now compare that to someone like Senator Bernie Sanders, who gets over 76% of his campaign support from small donors, or even Elizabeth Warren, who gets over 55% of her support from small donors. So we have to get away from this idea that it's just about corporate PAC money, because a lot of these candidates are not accepting corporate PAC money, like Kirsten Gillibrand and I believe Kamala Harris as well. But we have to look at where they do get their money from. So it's not just about corporate PAC money. It's also about large individual donations, because those large individual donations come from oftentimes these cocktail party fundraisers. So when you hold these cocktail party fundraisers with, wealthy bankers, you're not listening to the average person. So again, it's not just about the corporate PAC money. It's also about how are they actually raising their money and who are these large donors that are giving them a large portion of their money. Now, because I've been, I'm going to go back and forth here. I've been focusing a lot on the bad. Let's also focus on some good. So Kamala Harris is a co-sponsor of Bernie's Medicare for All bill, and also co-sponsor of the Raise the Wage Act, which wants to raise the wages for federal workers up to $15 an hour. So that's good. I mean, she has, being a co-sponsor on these bills is clearly a positive. But again, every time we look at a positive, we have to question, will she actually fight for these things if she had the power? Also a positive, I think being a woman and a person of color is a huge asset. So this is something that a lot of people that have my worldview in terms of supporting progressive policy, they think that identity doesn't matter at all. But no, identity absolutely has a place, absolutely does matter. Symbolism does matter. It does influence people. It does impact culture. So absolutely being a woman and a person of color in a position like being the president is incredibly important. But it's not the most important thing. I think policy is the most important thing. What you actually do for people is the most important thing. Also, more positives for Kamala Harris. She was fantastic in the Kavanaugh hearings. She is, in her element as a prosecutor. So when she's in those hearings going after Republicans, going after conservatives, she's fantastic. And I think that's where she shines the most. Now, another positive, potentially, at least the way her language is that she has the correct strategy going into going after Donald Trump. So watch this clip from Morning Joe.
Candidly, my focus would be, if I were going to run, it would not be Donald Trump. It would be the voters and the people of our country. they deserve, I believe, to hear from anyone who wants to be a leader. They deserve to hear from any one of us who puts ourselves out there how we are going to be relevant to their lives. And I believe that should be the focus of the conversation. And to the extent that it would invariably bring up what this administration has done or not done, of course that is relevant. But I believe that the motivation for the conversation and the focus of the conversation should be how are we, or whether we are relevant in the lives of people who are living every day, who expect and should trust that their government is thinking of them and not of ourselves.
So I think this is the correct strategy in going up against Donald Trump. Focus on what you will do for people and not necessarily just on Donald Trump. Now, of course, you should, of course, attack Donald Trump as well, but I think that goes without saying. That shouldn't be your entire focus as a person that is campaigning to be president. You need to focus on what you will do for actual people with your policy proposals. So she has the right strategy here. But this was part of a 25-minute conversation with Morning Joe, and there were zero specifics on actual policy at any point in this discussion. 25 minutes without any actual specifics on policy shows me that she's not going to have a very policy-focused campaign. Again, this is somebody who, even if she was strongly, or I mean, she won't, but if she, the progressive policies that she supports, like Medicare for All, because she's not strongly pushing those out there, because she isn't making that the focus of her campaign, at least not so far, at least not in the way she's been talking about leading up to this launch, then it shows you this is not going to be her focus. Her focus is going to be like many other politicians of the past, many other potential presidential candidates, of just being this very vague, oh, I'm going to do good things and I'm not going to do bad things. And it's just, we're done with this. I mean, it's 2019. This is the old way of campaigning. This is the 90s way of campaigning. You need actual focused policies, specific policies, and a history of fighting for those issues. So let's get to some of the bad, some more of the bad. Now, I mentioned, you know, she's great in those hearings because she's been a prosecutor. But because she's been a prosecutor, she has some terrible spots on her record. So this is a New York Times op-ed by a law professor and former director of the Loyola Law School Project for the Innocent. Kamala Harris was not a progressive prosecutor. The senator was often on the wrong side of history when she served as California's Attorney General. Time after time, when progressives urged her to embrace criminal justice reforms as a district attorney and then the state's Attorney General, Ms. Harris opposed them or stayed silent. Most troubling, Ms. Harris fought tooth and nail to uphold wrongful convictions that had been secured through official misconduct that included evidence tampering, false testimony, and the suppression of crucial information by prosecutors. So this piece has a few damning, or multiple damning examples. I'm only going to mention a few of them here, but if you want to read the full thing, I'll link to it below the video so you can actually read this New York Times piece in full. But let me give you some examples here. So Ms. Harris also championed state legislation under which parents whose children were found to be habitually truant in elementary school could be prosecuted, despite concerns that it would disproportionately affect low-income people of color. Now, as Jacobin writes here, this was a purely political move. But for its part, the Los Angeles Daily News, in an editorial that endorsed her, no less, argued that, quote, it was hard not to conclude that Harris chose truancy as an election season focus because it's an issue without much political risk. So this is one example. Let me just read a few more here from the New York Times. In 2015, she opposed a bill requiring her office to investigate shootings involving officers. She refused to support statewide standards regulating the use of body-worn cameras by police officers. For this, she incurred criticism from an array of left-leaning reformers, including Democratic state senators, the ACLU, and San Francisco's elected public defender. The activist, Felicia Jones, who had supported Ms. Harris for years, asked, how many more people need to die before she steps in? And then there's Kevin Cooper, the death row inmate whose trial was infected by racism and corruption. He sought advanced DNA testing to prove his innocence, but Ms. Harris opposed it. After the New York Times expose of the case went viral, she reversed her position. All this is a shame because the state's top prosecutor has the power and the imperative to seek justice. In cases of tainted convictions, that means conceding error and overturning them. Rather than fulfilling that obligation, Ms. Harris turned legal technicalities into weapons so she could cement injustices. So there's a number of indefensible moves that Kamala Harris took up. And again, you can read that full piece in the New York Times. I'll link it below the video. There are many more examples in there. But also, I want to get to some other issues here because it's just, there's more. There's more stuff that you should be concerned about. So on foreign policy, she has unwavering support of Israel. So this from Waleed Shahid. Quote, this is a quote from Kamala Harris at AIPAC 2017. I believe Israel should never be a partisan issue. And as long as I'm a United States Senator, I will do everything in my power to ensure broad and bipartisan support for Israel's security and the right to self-defense. So all this while the Israeli government continues to oppress Palestinians. Now, this is an issue that most Democrats are terrible on, but it's worth noting that Kamala Harris is no different here. Now, before I get to some more criticisms that, yeah, I have more coming up because there's a lot here. And even in this video, I'm not going to get to all the criticisms that have been lobbied against her. But let's look at, as a little break here, the people that do support her. So she has some questionable support. Like, for example, Ana Navarro, who is a Republican strategist. So she tweeted out, I've met Kamala Harris. She's relatable, comfortable in her skin, smart, tough and hard to put in a niche. She's serious but laughs easily. She's to my left on some issues. Some Ds tell me she's not left enough. She pretty much destroys women are called dislikable sexism charge. And she also has support from conservative blogger Jennifer Rubin, who tweeted out, more so than Obama, she stresses an inclusive message, aiming for America where everyone is seen and feels she has a place. Unlike Obama's cool and reserved persona, Harris radiates warmth and stresses her connection to friends, family, and community. Like, these are some ridiculous endorsements. Again, these endorsements completely ignore actual policy, are completely focused on her identity, how Kamala Harris comes off, which again, I think Kamala Harris comes off as a very likable person, which is why you have to be even more critical of what her record shows you. So let me go into more of that. The war on drugs. Harris has also recently taken up the habit of reminding us that, quote, the war on drugs was a failure. Yet Harris's record on drug reform while Attorney General is non-existent. She opted to not join in other states' attempts to take marijuana off the DEA's list of most dangerous substances. When Obama raided California's medical marijuana dispensaries, Harris put out an empty statement. When asked about legalizing recreational marijuana in 2012, only a week after the New York Times endorsed national legalization and less than a year before she started warning about the failure of the war on drugs, Harris laughed. As was the case with respect to the three strikes law, her 2014 Republican opponent ran to her left on the issue. Now, a lot of these moves, again, get masked because Kamala Harris may come off sometimes sounding progressive. She may come off as somebody who is very likable. Again, I think she is very likable. But that likability falls away when you look at her actual record on these issues. I mean, when her Republican opponent is running to her left on an issue, there's a problem. Now, there's more. So, I mean, I can't even get to all this, but here's a headline. Harris seeks to block gender reassignment for trans inmate. I mean, another indefensible move. How about her ties to Trump's Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin? Intercept obtained a 2013 memo to Harris from prosecutors in the Attorney General's office saying they had, quote, uncovered evidence suggestive of widespread misconduct at One West Bank and urging Harris to, quote, conduct a full investigation of a national bank's misconduct and provide a public accounting of what happened. Yet, Harris never did. Coincidentally, Harris was the only Democratic Senate candidate in 2016 to get a donation from Steve Mnuchin, One West's former CEO. So it's not surprising that Wall Street executives are hearing from Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, and other Democrats as they gauge interest in possible 2020 presidential campaigns. So it all comes back to the donors. Again, if you see somebody that has maybe a mixed record, sometimes they're progressive, sometimes they're conservative, look to their donors to see who they really are, because their donors control them. So in the case of someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she has small donors from her district and from around the country. Small donors, compared to someone like Kamala Harris, who largely depends on large donors at cocktail parties filled with Wall Street people. Now, again, just another note on the donation aspect. Dems rising star Kamala Harris meets with Clinton inner circle in the Hamptons, and that's reporting from 2017, showing you that, look, this is Kamala Harris's world. So if you have any question about who she represents her donors, which are Wall Street donors, Clinton donors, big donors at cocktail parties. That's who Kamala Harris, like many Democrats, represent. Now, I'm going to show you two critics here of Kamala Harris that are not white men. Now, I think it's fair to say that white men have a poor record, and you would be even maybe correct to question my motivations here of critiquing Kamala Harris. But white men aren't the only people that are critical of Kamala Harris. So let me give you two examples. This is Shanita Hubbard, who is the chair of the National Association of Black Journalists. She tweeted out, "I want to be excited about Kamala Harris, but I can't stop thinking about her work to block the release of non-violent offenders from overcrowded prisons on the grounds that if they got parole, prisons would be losing important labor pool. Can't afford to get excited over symbolism." And Brianna Gray from The Intercept has a great piece that is critical of Kamala Harris as well. "A problem for Kamala Harris. Can a prosecutor become president in the age of Black Lives Matter?" So again, these are two critics of Kamala Harris that are not white men. And I'm showing you this because there will absolutely 100% be people on CNN, MSNBC, and the usual mainstream outlets saying that, oh, the only people that are critical of Kamala Harris are racist and sexist. Which, of course, that will definitely exist. There will definitely be people that are racist and sexist attacking Kamala Harris. But there will also be good faith arguments that are critical of Kamala Harris and her record and the policies she is fighting for. This is just normal for any politician, any critique of anybody. There is going to be bad faith critiques and good faith critiques, so be able to separate the two. Now, all that said, look, this wasn't even everything. I could spend hours talking about Kamala Harris's record, breaking down everything she's done, but I need to end the video at some point. So there's more reading out there. I suggest doing more searches, do your own research on these candidates. But understand here, this is a primary fight. So if Kamala Harris were to happen to be the nominee in 2020 against Trump, I would definitely support Kamala Harris against Donald Trump. I would support any Democrat against Donald Trump and the Republicans, because the Republican Party and Donald Trump are garbage. They're just total garbage. So this is the time now to be critical of these candidates leading up to 2020, because you want somebody in the Democratic Party to not only be able to defeat Donald Trump, which honestly I think most people running would be able to defeat Donald Trump in 2020, but apart from that, you want someone to win who will actually do something for people. So if you are concerned about real policy actually moving the country forward and doing something for real people, then it's important to be critical of who that person will be to go up against Donald Trump in 2020, because that person will likely be the president, and you want somebody in that spot that will actually care about real people and implement policy that will help the lives of average Americans.